Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful night. This is our third Love Your Lake seminar series, and it's actually the last one in this particular series. We might do some more later on, but we're excited to have our special guest, Norman, here today. My name is Kirsten, and for those of you who have not joined or it's your first time joining, my name is Kirsten on behalf of the LKO board. We welcome you, and we're happy to bring these seminars to you, to our LKO community. Again, these are meant to be informative, to bring us together during these new and different times, and also to help us learn how to protect and bring awareness about our beautiful lake. Before I get started on just the logistics of this evening, I just wanted to mention a few upcoming events that you might want to know about during between June, July, and August. Our AGM, our LKO AGM is June the 16th at 7 p.m. We're doing a different time slot this year. It is going to be in the Zoom format. So if you're not a member, make sure you're a member and you can be part of our AGM. And lots of good things will be happening then. June 16th, as I said, 7 p.m. You can look to our e-blasts, our newsletters, or our social media for more information. In August, on August the 7th, there's a new event happening. It's called Cash Art on the Lake, and it's on August the 7th between 10 and 4 p.m. And it is an artisan event taking place at people's docks and properties around our lake. Guests are encouraged to tour the lake either by boat or by canoe, by kayak, environmentally sound watercraft, or by car to either purchase, admire, or view the items of the exhibitors. We hope to have a wide variety of artists and crafts to be displayed around the lake. And if you know of anybody that's interested in being one of those exhibitors, feel free to reach me at social@lko.ca. There are going to be registration forms for the artists, and we'll have stuff on our website that'll happen later on. But just so they know, save the date, August the 7th, 10 to 4 p.m. August the 8th is the rain date. And it obviously will be in a COVID-friendly way. Last little upcoming thing to know about, that these events, this Love Your Lake seminar, this is our last in our series, but we are doing some pre-recorded ones that are for the youth of the LKO. Patrick Davis, Alex McPhee, and Blake Parkinson are three of our LKO kids that are going to be doing some pre-recorded videos for us. That'll be for kids and youth to learn about. There'll be video shorts, so nothing as long as these seminars, but video shorts that will teach children about bats, teach children about the shoreline protection, what they can do to protect the environment and keep our lake forever, just as we're doing tonight. So something for them as well. And we're really pleased to have those three gentlemen to present those videos. So those will be coming soon throughout the summer and the fall and ongoing, but they're video shorts and fun to do. So this evening, for those that have not been here before, our guest speaker is Norman Yan. Thank you, Norm, for being here. And Norman is speaking about protecting our lakes forever, moving from rehabilitation to protection during a time of climate change. After Norman has spoken and done his thing, we will have a time to do a Q&A session, and please feel free to use that chat function that you've got there, because we won't be using we won't unmuting you. We're keeping everybody muted just because then the reception is better for everybody. But use that chat function so that we can have a conversation with Norm and us, and we can learn together. As a reminder, this seminar is being recorded, so it's available for those that are not able to be here tonight. And thanks to Scott McPhee and his son Alex, we have a YouTube channel. Woo! And so the two previous speakers, Rebecca Osborne and Terry Moore, their videos the videos have been uploaded to our LKO YouTube channel. So feel free to, if you missed them or you wanted to go back and see what was talked about and remind yourself of the importance of our lake and everything. So feel free to go to our YouTube channel and check it out. There's two uploaded there. Thanks again to Scott and Alex. And this one will be uploaded there once we're done as well. I think that's about it. So let's get things started. I'm going to ask Kathy Conlon, who is Director of Environmental on our LKO board. She's going to introduce our guest speaker tonight. So over to you, Kathy.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'm truly honored to introduce Dr. Norman Yan to you. Dr. Yan is a freshwater ecologist who has devoted half a century to understanding human impacts on our Ontario lakes, how to fix the damage, and how to prevent it from happening again. He graduated with his PhD and became a research scientist with the Ontario government, and then professor at York University, and finally chair of the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed, working from the Dorset Environmental Science Center. Norman has co-authored over 200 scientific papers, which have received more than 10,000 citations. He's received both provincial and national awards for his research excellence. He has had fellowships in Europe and in Australia. And in 2012, he was inducted into the Academy of Science of the Royal Society of Canada. On a personal note, Norman and his wife Sandy have entertained over 4,000 guests in their Muskoka home, and he has held every position there is on the board of the Muskoka Bed and Breakfast Association. Thank you, Norman, for speaking to us tonight.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to speak with you tonight. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Way to go.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm going to talk for half an hour tonight, really about what I've learned over the last half century, as Kathy has said, about how to look after our lakes. And let's start by admitting that things can go very wrong. You'll see in this picture here, this nasty surface bloom of blue-green algae. And 50 years ago, this was a very common sight on lakes in Southern Ontario and across the world. It came to be called eutrophication, or too much food. It was one of the first times that people around the world tried to understand what they could do better about lakes. And fairly quickly, because this is a plant and plants need nutrients, it came to be understood that there could be too many nutrients, and the critical thing became understanding what is the critical nutrient. And you will all know, because you live on a lake, that attention quickly focused on phosphorus. And once attention focused on phosphorus, we figured out how to lower the phosphorus levels by reducing levels in detergents and by building tertiary treatment cells on sewage treatment plants. And when that was done in Muskoka Bay, in Gravenhurst Bay, here's what happened. The levels of phosphorus were around 40 to 50 in the 60s and early 70s. And then they came down to levels that were similar to what would have been for hundreds of years previously. If you look at the very early papers summarizing treatments for eutrophication of lakes around the world, you'll see Gravenhurst Bay is often included in those studies because of this data set. So if the 60s was eutrophication was the issue, the 70s, it was acid rain. And those of you with hair the color of mine will remember this very well. This graph that you're seeing here is the recovery from acid rain in a lake called Clearwater Lake, which is up near Sudbury. And this is a pH scale. And those of you that remember your grade 9 chemistry know that pH moving from 4 to 5 is a 10-fold change in acidity. From 5 to 6, another 10-fold change, getting less acidic. So the pH of Clearwater Lake went from just over 4 to over 6.5, representing about a 300-fold reduction in acidity. And in 2000, we started hearing rumors that there were fish in the lake. There hadn't been fish in this lake since probably the 1930s. So in September of 2001, a crew headed out to Clearwater Lake and found 3 species of fish. And this was the exciting one, fathead minnows. They only live 2 years, and they can't live at a pH less than 6. So basically, the instant the pH of the lake was up above 6 again, the fish showed up. So what do we learn from this? We can learn from these two stories that there's 4 or 5 steps needed at a sort of high level to look after your lakes. You first need to figure out that something has gone wrong. And that means you need to be looking at the lake. You need to have a sense for what you value about the lake. You need a way to measure what you value. In this case, we don't want surface blooms of algae, and we would like to have fish. And if you don't have fish and you used to, and you have surface blooms of algae and you didn't used to, you know something's gone wrong. The next stage is to figure out what to do about it. There's always multiple reasons why fish could disappear or why algae could bloom, and you need to figure out which ones have changed. That knowledge then needs usually to be communicated so that you can generate the will for action. If there's one lesson I've learned from 50 years of research on problems in lakes, is that it really only does take knowledge and will to fix problems as long as your democracy is functioning well. And then so you need to act on that knowledge. In this case, build sewage treatment plants, get rid of phosphorus from detergents and make sure septic systems are working well. Or in the case of acid rain, reduce the emissions of sulfur across Eastern North America and see if it works. Now, the group that I have been working with since I retired in 2014 is called the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed. And our vision is to protect Muskoka lakes and watersheds forever. It's kind of a vision that's probably not too different from yours on your lake. And we've taken those 4 or 5 steps and put them in a little circle. And we start by tracking what we think of are the key threats to the watershed. We always try and have a couple of scientists on our board. I'm one, and Dr. Neil Hutchinson is the other water scientist on our board. And our responsibility is to kind of keep up with what scientists think are the real threats to lakes in our area. And then if we have identified a threat, our next goal is to try and figure out why we haven't dealt with it. So are there actually knowledge gaps that need to be addressed so that we can solve that problem in our lakes? And we get really interested in problems where local action can help actually deal with the problem. But if there's a knowledge gap that has to be addressed, this is the point where we always need to raise some money, usually, because we're probably going to bring in some academic strength, some professors and their students to help us generate the knowledge that we need to plug the knowledge gap on what's causing the problem. To date, the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed has raised actually about $800,000 to address the issues that we think are most serious in our area. So once we generate the knowledge, we move around the loop and try and encourage policymakers and others to fix that problem, and then we see if it worked. It's a nice little circle, but it can take years to go through, and we understand that. The lakes are patient. So let's go through those steps and think about the biggest threats to our lakes, and this would include Halliburton lakes and our lakes. So Professor Andrea Reed and a whole bunch of colleagues a couple of years ago published a paper called Emerging Threats and Persistent Conservation Challenges for Freshwater Biodiversity. And this was for lakes all around the world. And they listed these 12 threats. Now, with the possible exception of hydropower expansion, all of these are actually potential threats in Muskoka and in Halliburton. But there are 6 of them that are beyond threats, that are actually already problems here. And these are those 6. Algal blooms, particularly the type of algal bloom which is often called a HAB, a hazardous algal bloom, where the algae actually might be toxic. And this is happening despite low and falling levels of phosphorus. We've actually done a pretty darn good job controlling phosphorus levels in our lakes, but despite that, we're getting more algal blooms, as I'll show you in a minute. You'll all know, again, especially those with white hair, that calcium problems in humans can cause osteoporosis. And actually, I think it's about a quarter of all Canadian seniors suffer from osteoporosis. We're now seeing that issue across the landscape. You can think of it as kind of environmental osteoporosis or ecological osteoporosis. Next, invading species. Before this call started, I was talking with members of your board about the invading species on Kashaga-Wigamong Lake. I'll show you a picture of my favorite invader, the spiny water flea. Next is road salt. If you live on a lake that has a winter maintained highway that runs largely through your watershed, chances are chloride levels have increased in your lake over time. And then the biggie, climate change, which affects all of the lakes in the area. And then what I want to talk about today is whether climate change might be a threat multiplier for these other threats, and collectively all might lead to an increased risk of HABs, of hazardous algal blooms. But first, let's just prove to you that we have these threats. This data from the Ministry of the Environment is a graph showing the number of confirmed algal blooms and the rise of those confirmed blooms over time over the last 25 years. And for me, the alarming thing is that the big increase is actually happening with the cyanobacteria, also called the blue-green algae, those in this kind of light green color. So this absolutely, we're seeing more cyanobacteria in Ontario, and this is actually happening across Eastern Canada. And so that is an issue that has risen its head again, even though we thought we had dealt with it with knowledge generated in the 70s and 80s. Secondly, this ecological osteoporosis problem I've called calcium decline. What this graph is from data from Andrew Patterson at the Dorset Environmental Science Center. We're so lucky to have that science center in our region. They have 7 lakes that they've been sampling every month or every couple of weeks, going back to the 1980s or the late 70s, actually being sampled in exactly the same way. And there's been almost a 40% decline in lake water calcium levels in these 7 lakes over that period of 35 years. These lakes were not selected to be vulnerable to low calcium. This has just snuck up on them, and the fact that we were watching allowed us to detect it. Now, the percentage decline is not as important as the actual level. Half of these lakes now have less than 1.5 milligrams per liter of calcium. And at those levels, crayfish die, the water fleas, they eat the algae, start to die, clams start to die. And there's kind of a sharp threshold right around 1.5 milligrams per liter. So calcium decline affects half the lakes in Muskoka. And we think 20% of lakes in Haliburton is a low estimate, because the data I've been able to summarize from Haliburton lakes is just from the bigger cottage lakes. But in Muskoka, we've actually sampled over 500 lakes, including a lot of the smaller non-cottage lakes. Here is the spiny water flea. For those who've never seen it, this is a millimeter ruler. So this is about 1 centimeter long. So the animal is about 1 centimeter long. And most of the animal is this tail spine, which is colored bright red in the water. So fish can see it and quickly learn not to eat this animal because they get stabbed by this tail spine. Here's her head. She's carrying 5 babies on her back. Those are their heads and their eyes. And this I consider to be the worst threat to the animal plankton of our lakes since acid rain. So there's been a big impact on the water fleas in lakes. It eats most of them and kills them off, and the ones that it doesn't eat have to flee away from the warm surface waters during the day. And the result of that is there's less animals eating the algae in the water column during the day. So here, I want to talk for just a second about road salt. Here are chloride levels, and these levels are due entirely to sodium chloride or road salt, measured in Lake Muskoka, going back to the earliest numbers I've been able to find, which was in 1983 in Bala Bay. And you can see there's various gaps because we haven't been doing this as reliably in Lake Muskoka, but you can see a general increase in chloride. It's kind of stabilized in the main basin of the lake at around 6 milligrams per liter. but it still seems to be rising in Gravenhurst Bay or Muskoka Bay, and it's up over 10. And at 10 milligrams per liter of chloride in soft water, animals start dying. And so again, we're losing the animals that eat the algae. Just to give you a sense for how much salt this represents about 12,000 tons of road salt in Lake Muskoka. So essentially, it would be like 1,000 salt trucks driving up to the edge of the lake and dumping their load into the lake. That's essentially what's happened, because the salt doesn't stay on the highways very long and ends up in the ditches and then goes downstream. So road salt salinity is affecting now about 20% of the lakes in Muskoka. And then there's climate change. Now there's many metrics we could summarize here, but the simplest one provided by Huasha Yao, who's the meteorologist at the Dorset Environmental Science Center, is just ice cover. So if you just look at the slope of these lines, there's more days in the year on this one lake that are ice-free, and there's fewer days that are ice-covered. And this is called Harp Lake, one of the Dorset's main study lakes, has about 3 more weeks of non-ice now compared to what it used to have. And so it's like an extra week every decade. And so that accumulates pretty quickly. So those are individual threats. Here's the Muskoka watershed with its 1,600 lakes. And these threats likely interact. Calcium decline is mainly a problem in Algonquin Park in the northeast part of the watershed. Calcium levels have not declined in Lake Muskoka because people have added enough calcium to make up for this natural decline. Salt, I've just shown it in a few areas here. It's worst right around Gravenhurst. Jevons Lake has over 100 milligrams per liter of chloride. In Muskoka right now, there's almost 1,000-fold range in chloride levels among lakes. Natural chloride levels have actually fallen because we've cleaned up the rain, but we're also adding a lot of salt to the roads. Hazardous algal blooms, I've just highlighted an area that has them most commonly now, a few lakes in this area, but I'm going to show you in a minute, there are lakes in Algonquin Park that are having algal blooms now too. Floods, and none of you need to be told about where floods are happening. We've had 200-year floods in the last 10 years in Muskoka that tend to be located, and so there's over 1,000 properties have been damaged by flooding in Muskoka. The spiny water flea tends to be found in areas that are developed because people bring it in on their boats in some way. So there is still no evidence of spiny water flea in Algonquin Park, for example, but climate change is happening everywhere. So any particular lake might suffer from, say, calcium decline up here or road salt down here, but wherever that particular lake is, chances are the climate has also changed, and that may interact with that individual stressor. So let's think for a minute about algal blooms. This is an air photo of the algal bloom that happened in Dixon Lake and Algonquin Park in 2015. This absolutely shocked every limnologist that learned about it. This is not a lake that should have algal blooms. There is no development. The forest is intact. The phosphorus levels are low, but despite all that, there was this massive algal bloom that happened in a couple of years. And it's still the most serious risk of algal blooms is high phosphorus, but we're getting algal blooms for the first time now in lakes with low phosphorus, and we don't completely understand it yet, but we're pretty sure there are a link to these various stressors, including climate change. So let's talk about algae at a very high level for a minute and just realize they're small plants or plant-like creatures. A typical lake might have 1,000 or 2,000 different species of algae, and we need them. So let's remember that every second breath we take is a gift of algae. And there wouldn't be any free oxygen in the atmosphere if it wasn't for algae. We wouldn't be here at all. They produced all the free oxygen that's in the atmosphere. So generally speaking, algae are good for us, but every once in a while they can go bad. And then we need to look at what's going on. So we need to kind of realize three things. First of all, that all plant species have preferences for chemistry and physics, temperature, oxygen, lake chemistry. So we need to realize that if there are changes in water movements or lake chemistry or oxygen levels, that might affect which species do best. And the abundance of algae, like all plants, is a function of how quickly they grow, which is usually governed by nutrients like phosphorus, and how quickly they die, which is normally in lakes caused by the grazers. So here's an analogy. Most of us wouldn't want our lawns to look like this, but if we fertilize too much and don't mow ever, our lawns are going to end up looking like this, and our neighbors won't be happy with us. There are lots of other creatures that might be very happy with us, but our neighbors probably won't be. Let's think about for a minute where the nutrients, first of all, come from. You all have a sense that your lake isn't isolated from its watershed. And any time we could add extra nutrients to this watershed, it could end up in the lake. If we could do that by clearing, if we clear too much of the shoreline, if we don't maintain our septic tanks. Here's one you may not know, if we flood land and the trees die, the vast majority of the phosphorus that's actually in the whole watershed is tied up in the trees. And if you kill the trees, it can leach out. The rain has about 2 to 3 times more phosphorus than the lake. And so if you get rid of all the trees, phosphorus levels in the lake will go up by a factor of 3, and you're going to have an algal bloom. So the more we protect trees, they're actually acting as a filter that's actually capturing nutrients out of the air and protecting our lakes. The other thing is we can get nutrients coming out of the bottom of lakes. And when that particularly happens, when phosphorus is mobilized, it's when the bottom goes anaerobic. And we think this is probably what happened in Dixon Lake and Algonquin Park, that the normal mixing caused by the wind, it was an incredibly calm summer, and there was no mixing of the lake, and the bottom went anaerobic. It lost contact with the atmosphere, and nutrients came out from the lake sediments. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So then there's the lawnmowers. I call these animal plankton the little living lawnmowers in our lakes. There's 10,000 times more of these little animals in Lake Muskoka than there are people on Earth. They filter the entire lake free of algae every week or 10 days or so in the summer. So if we want to protect our lakes, we should protect these little animals that we never think about that are keeping our lakes clean. This is a Daphnia. I've kind of spent my life working on animals like this. This one's called a copepod. They're little shrimp. They're related to lobsters. If you get enough of them, you can make a shrimp bisque. But if you're Jewish like I am, you wouldn't want to eat them because they're crustaceans and they're not kosher. So I see Kristen like that. Let's try and bring all this together. How do all these stressors influence the risk of algal blooms in lakes? So I basically said that if there's faster algal growth caused by more phosphorus, for example, or less algal death, because we get rid of the little lawnmowers, you might end up with an algal bloom. And this is kind of what's happening in our lakes. So as calcium falls, the calcium-rich zooplankton, those little animals are about 8% calcium by weight. They have more calcium than we do. And when the calcium falls to less than 1.5 milligrams per liter, which is now happening in half the lakes in Muskoka, they start dying. Road salt is higher than 10 milligrams per liter of chloride now in about 20% of the lakes in Muskoka. These animals start dying at those salt levels. The spiny water flea has invaded all the big lakes in Muskoka. It's eating off a lot of these little animal plankton or driving them into deeper waters where they can't eat the algae. Unfortunately, low calcium doesn't hurt them at all. They have lower calcium needs than almost any animal I've ever looked at. I had a PhD student try to sort that out. What's the interaction between calcium and the spiny water flea on zooplankton? I don't know about their tolerance to road salt, but they can live in almost distilled water. On the other side, we all have a sense for these links, that if there's too much development that isn't wisely planned, too much land clearing, not well-maintained septic systems, all of that can lead to increased loads of phosphorus in lakes. But what we're starting to learn is that flooding linked to climate change can erode more banks of streams, and just killing off trees. If we put culverts in that are the wrong size and we flood the land and kill trees, suddenly we mobilize a lot of phosphorus that's been stored in the forest. Okay, so now let's bring climate change into this. I assume most of you have seen this remarkable long-term record that's now 60 years old, 70 years old, of rising CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And the zigzag relating to essentially to the breathing of the world. When the earth goes around the sun, and the northern hemisphere, which has more forest, tilts towards the sun in the summer, carbon dioxide levels fall. When the southern hemisphere that has less plants is pointing at the sun, carbon dioxide levels rise. So that zigzag pattern is kind of a reflection of the breathing of the earth by the forests that are taking or not taking up carbon dioxide. Not more than 99% of atmospheric scientists in the world now agree that that pattern of CO2 change is responsible for this temperature change. But if you look at the atmospheric temperature over the last 100 years or so, there's been almost a 1 degree increase in temperature. There is essentially no disagreement among atmospheric scientists that this is something that we did. So what might the influence of this rising temperature be on the risk of algal blooms in Muskoka lakes and Halliburton lakes? How might it interact with the stressors that I've talked about? Isn't this a remarkable photograph, a satellite photograph from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US of snow streamers coming off Lake Superior and Lake Michigan and Georgian Bay, completely hiding Muskoka and Halliburton. You can still see the southern half of Lake Simcoe. Buffalo is being buried. Syracuse is being snow. When we have more snow, people use more salt. So there is a link between, and we tend to have got more snow over the last 20 years. And so we tend to use more salt because of that. This will probably only last about 30 years, another 30 years. All the models that have been done suggest that it's going to get warm enough in the winter that we're actually not going to see more snow and then after about 30 years from now, we're going to get more rain in the winter. And lakes are warming. There's a remarkable program called GLEON, the Global Lake Ecological Observatory Network, group of people, 200 odd scientists all around the world that are merging their data sets. And here's the result of merging data sets on surface water temperatures in lakes from over the last 25 years. Lakes that are blue, and there are some, here's one in Northwest Australia, have actually got cooler, but the vast majority of lakes have got warmer. They're red. The darker the color, the warmer the lakes have got. And kind of in the Muskoka area, they've warmed at just over almost a degree per decade. They've actually been warming faster than the air has been warming. We could have a whole separate discussion about why that is. But it's a very interesting pattern. You all know the story about the frog that sits in the pot on the stove in cold water until it gets too hot. Well, here's an example of that for the little animal plankton that I work on. A remarkable scientist called Winfried Lampert tracked a whole bunch of different lines. These are all different genetic lines of Daphnia. And he asked how quickly they grew. That's what's plotted here on the y-axis as temperature got warmer. And up until about 28, 29 degrees, they were actually getting they were growing faster all the time, and then they hit a wall. And suddenly, right around 29 degrees, they all just started dying or growing much less slowly. When I started working up here 30 years ago, lake temperatures never got more than hit 24 degrees in the summer at the surface. Now they're hitting 28. So we're getting close to these thresholds. Here's my most complicated graph. And so I apologize for it a bit in advance, and I'll just explain one part of it. I had a student, Don Ashforth, who was interested in the effects of low calcium on the health of water fleas, those cute little animals that keep our lakes clean, filter the whole volume of Kashaga-Wigamog every week in the summer, eating all the algae. And she was interested in the interaction of temperature with falling calcium levels. She worked at 32 degrees, but there's no graph here for 32 because they all died. All the animals died. At 28 degrees, that's this gray bar here, they didn't do as well as at 24, but there was no effect of falling calcium. Those bars are all the same height. But as calcium fell to less than 1.5, the bars got shorter, and the impact of the change in temperature from 24 to 28, that difference got larger. So as calcium was lower, the animals became more sensitive to rising temperature. And then, of course, there's flooding. I live 5 minutes up the road by walking. So I walked down the hill to look at Bracebridge Bay during the spring flood of 2019. Here's the shoreline of the bay is over here somewhere. So this was quite a flood. And it eroded all kinds of materials from the shoreline. Here's an example of that. So much material was moved that the Lady Muskoka tour boat can no longer get down the river and out into Lake Muskoka. So it's been a big economic impact. They estimated the dredging cost would be $250,000 to $500,000 before they could start their business up again. So, and here is maybe the most surprising effect of climate change. I don't know how many people on the call are sailors, but you may have noticed that the sailing is getting tougher. This is the number of summer days in June, July, and August, up to 90 days in June, July, and August, where the winds are calm, less than 1.5 meters a second, versus the winds are brisk, between 1.5 and 3 meters per second. There's been almost a doubling in the number of calm days over the last 25, 30 years. Even though there's more energy in the atmosphere, it's warmer, we're having more calm days. What's happening is we have more calm days and then suddenly a big storm. And then it settles into a new pattern of calm days again. Now, when you have calm days, lakes don't mix. And when lakes don't mix, they go anaerobic at the bottom. And when they go anaerobic at the bottom, they release phosphorus and you can have algal blooms, I think. So let me summarize climate change as kind of a threat multiplier for algal blooms. We can actually maybe have more salt used because we have more lake effect snow. We have warmer water for sure. And that's just better for the blue-green algae themselves. They survive better in warmer water than all the other better algae do. And we can have, as I showed you, increased damage to the little living lawnmowers that eat the algae from other stressors like low calcium. And then we can have more nutrients potentially if we have more floods. And then just the habitat for blue-green algae can get better with warmer water, lower wind speeds, and lower bottom water oxygen in the late summer and fall. We're getting these algal blooms now in the late summer and fall, which never used to happen before. So let's put this all together. I'm now going to take the same graph with the stressors. You get more algal blooms if there's faster algal growth or lower algal death. And then maybe even if there's just better habitat for blue-green algae if the water is warmer. So let's add the climate change stressor here. With climate change, we have more snow and more road salt used. As it physically just gets warmer and we hit 28 degrees at the surface, we kill the animal plankton. If it's warmer, the blue-green algae are happier. If we have more floods, we can get more erosion. And if we have lower wind speeds, we can get more anoxia. So there's all kinds of ways where climate change can serve as a threat multiplier for hazardous algal blooms. So shouldn't we do something about this? It's hard individually for us to fix the climate change problem ourselves, but we can protect our forests. Forests capture phosphorus from the atmosphere. They shade tributaries and keep them cooler. I think the neatest thing they might do related to this is capture of phosphorus. I don't know if they leak phosphorus when they're calcium limited. That's something that we hope to work on, but we think it's possible. Shouldn't we try and protect these little living lawnmowers by keeping the spiny water flea out and keeping salt levels low, for example, and then support research so that we understand really what's going on. Even though we have lake partner programs, which are fabulous, and I support them wholeheartedly, we tend to report only the phosphorus and the SECI data. We don't tend to report the salt and the calcium and other features which would actually help us understand when there are emerging threats. And I think air and water temperature are things that we should be measuring. And I suspect that there are people on the lake that measure surface temperature with Maxman thermometers hanging off their docks. Wouldn't it be nice if we could gather up all that data and say, my God, the lake's hitting 28 degrees, there might be an issue out here, something like that. And then implement real-time monitoring data. We're not in areas that actually could lead to algal blooms. We don't really understand why there are more fall blooms in some lakes, but we have good hypotheses worth exploring. For example, stiller water because of lower winds and more anoxia on the bottom. And if that's the mechanism, then we can do something about that. There are ways you can stir the lake enough that it would correct for that problem. We don't really know if all of these problems of calcium decline and fall warming and road salt or the spiny water flea increase the risk of hazardous algal blooms. We do know that it increased the risk to the little living lawnmowers that eat the algae, but we haven't really put it all together to show that if you have a lake, for example, that's hot and has the spiny water flea in it, so that the animal plankton are suffering, it's at some level when there aren't enough animal plankton anymore, you might get an algal bloom. And we don't yet know what that level is yet. And this one fascinates me. Calcium decline is an issue in our forests. Widespread sugar maple decline is caused by low calcium, but we don't know what that's done to the ability of the forest to retain phosphorus. 85% of the land up here is still forested. It makes perfect sense that that forest cover, that filter of the rain, it will be very important for the health of our lakes. There are only 2 places in Muskoka and Haliburton that I'm aware of where the Dorset Environmental Science Center is collecting near bottom oxygen data on a regular basis that will help us understand whether it's what is the near bottom oxygen level at which phosphorus is released, and that might trigger an algal bloom. And here is a picture of one of those platforms. It's in Harp Lake. It's called Thelma. There is also a Louise, is the nickname of the other platform. Thank God they called the other one Louise, you know. Okay, and then if we have the knowledge of what to do, we can use that to foster the will to act. And that's where groups like your Cottage Association and the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed get involved. So we have an Ash Muskoka project that's collecting fireplace ashes and wood stove ashes from about 800 people in Muskoka. And we're using that, we're taking it back to the forest to try and fix the white pine in sugar bushes and in unmanaged forests. And I guarantee that sugar bushes in Haliburton could benefit from this as well. And we're fostering what's called the Smart About Salt program, because we often use more salt than we need in our parking lots and on our driveways and it's kind of expensive to do that, and it threatens the lakes, and it's completely unnecessary. So anyway, I'll just end by thanking you for the invitation, by inviting you to come and have a look at the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed website. Our mission, it's a bit sciencey. It's to foster the understanding, choices, actions that underpin the wise management needed to protect our freshwater ecosystems forever. And Haliburton lakes have pretty well exactly the same issues as Muskoka lakes. So we have lots of friends in Haliburton, and we've talked to them lots of times, and they've talked to us. I invite you to come have a look at our website. And if you're so interested, you might want to become a member of the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed. I'd be happy to come and talk to you again in the future. Kirsten and Kathy, if that's of any interest, as we learn what we have to do to protect our lakes from the multiple stressors they're facing during a time of climate warming. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Norman. That was very comprehensive. I really appreciate it. At this point in time, if you wanted to get us back so we can see everyone's beautiful faces again, and we'll have the Q&A session. So you'll just unshare your screen. There we are. There we all are. Beautiful. We have a couple of questions for you from our audiences. This one it says, I'm concerned with the increase in high speed and wave creating boats that are releasing chemicals and negative bacteria that are trapped in the lake sediments. Is my fear realistic? Norm?
Well, there is no doubt that wakes from boats are not appreciated, particularly by loons. So if you swamp less of loons, that would be not good. And it can also mobilize a little bit of sediments in shallows if there's lots of boat traffic. And depending on the kind of motor oil and gasoline that's used, if it's an older boat, they tended to lose a fair bit of their gas into the water. And some elements in gasoline are potentially toxic. So yes, those are legitimate concerns, in addition just to the noise of boat traffic, which not everyone appreciates. I wasn't quite sure about the bacterial component of that question. Maybe that person could try again and ask me what particular the concern was about bacteria from boat gas or boat wakes.
Sure. Yeah, because it was saying creating boats that are releasing chemicals and negative bacteria that are trapped in the lake sediments.
Oh, so to release bacteria that might otherwise be trapped in lake sediments.
Correct.
Well, that's something I've never thought about. I mean, the bacteria, there are, of course, trillions of bacteria in every square centimeter of sediments. The vast majority of them are good bacteria, but there might very well be the odd fecal coliform or fecal streptococcus. The fecal coliforms don't live very long in the water, but if they're constantly being added and then mixed up, I can see that they might last in the water column a little bit longer. I can see that you could probably make an argument for that. Once they get to the deeper sediments, they'd be killed by the cold water quite quickly because they're used to living at body temperatures at around 35 degrees centigrade, and lakes never get that hot up here, thank God. So I would be more worried about the influence on loons and on shoreline erosion than I would be about bacteria, I think.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Ray, for that question. Thank you, Norm, for answering it. With another one from Heather, can you please elaborate on the spiny water flea invasion? Is there a predator? Can anything be done to stop the invasion, and how fast is the flea's invasion increasing? Good questions.
So let me just warn you. Sorry, what was the name of the questioner?
Heather.
Heather. So Heather, let me warn you that I published 30 papers on the spiny water flea. So if you want more details, you can send me a separate email and I can talk about the spiny water flea all day. And they invaded, I think, Kashagwiggamog in 1993, probably earlier than that. They love Canadian Shield lakes. We have them in dozens of lakes in Muskoka. In fact, Muskoka and Haliburton are kind of ground zero for the spread of the spiny water flea out of the Great Lakes in Canada. Here are the worries. My initial worries was they might have increased mercury levels in fish, number one, because they lengthen the food chain. But it turns out that has not happened. Other invertebrates might concentrate mercury, but for some reason the spiny water flea doesn't. So the fact that there's now spiny water fleas in many lakes on the Shield, including in your lake, has not apparently resulted in increased mercury levels in sport fish. However, they do compete with small fish. They actually kind of act like a small fish. They're visual predators. And so there is some evidence in the short term that there's an increased growth of some fish that target them, but that's short-lived. In the long term, if anything, you might expect slightly reduced abundance of fish because the spiny water flea are competing with small fish for the animal plankton prey. Is there anything can be done about the spiny water flea? Almost everyone will tell you no. Once you've got them in a lake, you've got them forever. I hate that answer because no one has ever tried to do anything to get rid of them. If I was 15 years younger and I hadn't retired, pretty well retired when I found them, that probably would have been my major area of research, trying to figure out how to get rid of the spiny water flea.
There's still time, Norm. There's still
time. Okay.
Still time.
I think there's one weakness in their life history. And that weakness is that they produce an overwintering resting egg. That's the result of sexual production. All summer, they reproduce asexually, mothers producing daughters, producing more daughters. But in the fall, for a short period of time, they need guys, but it's only to reproduce. Most small plankton, a lot of small plankton have given up altogether on men as a complete waste of time. So mothers just produce daughters nonstop. There are whole classes of animals in the plankton that do that. But the spiny water flea still need a few men around in the fall. But the egg that they produce only lives a year or two. Now that may not, in the sediments and then hatches, that may not seem like a weakness, but the Daphnia, the things they eat, their resting eggs can live for more than a century in the sediments. You can hatch, animals on occasion hatch out of the sediments in Kashagwiggamog that were put in the sediments before European colonizers arrived. Those eggs could be hundreds of years old, but the spiny water flea, that's not possible. The spiny water flea eggs only live for a year or two. If you could interrupt the females finding the males in the fall for 2 years, that probably would be enough to get rid of them in the lake.
So there's hope.
I think there's hope, but we have to figure out how the gals find the guys. What is it? What are the clues? What perfumes do and it'll be perfumes.
I'm telling you.
What perfumes do the girls use to attract the guys? Because it's normally chemical senses that they have. We need to find that perfume and add it to the lakes and saturate the lake with that perfume. And then
they shouldn't be together anyway. It's COVID time, so they shouldn't be together anyway. So I don't know what's going on.
So anyway, I think it's possible to get rid of them in a way that would be selective if we could find that perfume. But there's no other mechanism, no predator or something that, or alternatively, we could just wait 100 years.
Well, that's a bit too long for me.
In Norway, like the spiny water flea is not native to Scandinavia, but it colonized there about 1,000 years ago, being carried across Europe by Paleolithic hunters for sure. And in Norway, it's just part of the fauna, but it doesn't look yet like our legs have adapted to it. the animal plankton are still in terrible shape in lakes with the spiny water flea.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. There's a lot there. As I say, I think there's still time for you to do that research paper there, Norm. Someone else is asking, Judy's saying, and I had a thought about this too, is that because when you showed us the ash Muskoka, should we have an ash Halliburton? Should regular cottagers or people that are living up here put their wood ashes in the forest? Is that something that we should do regularly?
I would recommend it. I'll just give you the number because it's shocking. Acid rain has stripped about 0.5 ton of calcium per hectare from our forests in Halliburton, Muskoka, Nipissing, Parry Sound. You know, and our soil is only a foot thick anyway, or 2 feet thick, and so calcium is now limiting the growth of the forest. Ash is about 30% calcium from our fireplaces. I encourage you to keep it very cool.
Yes.
You don't start a forest fire, and that can take days. You have to let it cool for days, and then put it around the hardwoods.
Okay.
If you, the softwoods don't really need it, but maple need it most. Yeah, that would be good. And go to the ash. There is a little Ash Muskoka website you can go to, which has instructions on how to do that.
Okay.
And so, but let me say one or two other things about ash. The ash I really want is to come up from Southern Ontario, because their ash is probably more calcium rich than ours. If you burn a tree, which we all do, you know, because we love our fireplaces, and put that ash back, you're not actually increasing the amount of ash in the watershed, because you're recycling it, and that's very good. You're not increasing, if the trees came from your property, the total amount of ash or the total amount of calcium that was already there. So we need to get more ash into our forests. I'll just tell you, we're just working in a sugar bush now, and the results for the sap production on sugar maple and ash plots versus the non-ash plots was stunning. We got 20 liters more sap per tap from the trees that were growing on the ash plots within a year of adding the ash. So
wow,
sugar maple are in trouble in Muskoka and Halliburton. They don't, and it's calcium, low calcium, that's the problem. There also might be a link to flooding. I just want to make this point, because calcium is involved in the physiology of the stomata, which are the little pores and leaves that absorb CO2 and release oxygen and release moisture. So in an experiment in the United States that was done in an area similar to Halliburton and Muskoka that suffered from acid rain, when they added the calcium that was lost to acid rain, the transpiration rate of the whole forest went up by 20%. And for the first time ever, the stream dried up. They'd always assumed that the stream in the one catchment was a permanent stream. It wasn't. It was only a permanent stream because the forest wasn't fully awake. And when they replaced the calcium that was lost to acid rain, the forest woke up. The birds came back, the snails came back, wood production rates increased by 20%. They captured more carbon. The best thing we can do in Muskoka and Halliburton to deal with climate change is to wake our forests up by getting rid of the calcium decline problem.
Okay, so we're going to start on ash Halliburton then.
Yes.
Okay.
Now,
Jenny had a question saying, I have a question about the large clumps of dark green algae that rise to the surface of the lakes. It seems that when the temperature of the air is warm and the water is cold, these clumps appear, and then they appear again more often when the air and water temperatures are similar. Can you comment on these large clumps? Are they bad for the health of the lake? They aren't too fun to swim through.
So I'm assuming this is in shallow water, not out in the middle of the lake. And in shallow water, they are not unhealthy and they're not damaging the lake in any way. But it probably means that there's filamentous green algae growing on the sediments, either on rocks or on twigs or even on sand, that's not being grazed adequately by crayfish or grazing insects and that kind of thing. And on warm summer days, it can catch bubbles of gas that come out of the bottom, and that can lift those that filamentous algae up to the surface. Now I'm going to tell you what they're called. And in the community, it's actually called elephant snot when that happens. And when they rise to the surface and drift away, it's called rogue elephant snot.
Love it. Thank you. I'm speechless.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. You might have said something else.
I know.
So where that was an enormous problem years ago was in acid lakes that lost all their crayfish. So that these shoreline growths of the filamentous algae encrusted everything under those circumstances, and big masses of it started drifting away. And so I wonder whether it's smallmouth bass or bass have been introduced into the lakes, and the bass make the crayfish hide and from being eaten. And if there's no crayfish, then you can get more algae. And so all these things are connected.
Okay. Hopefully that gives you, so Jenny, more information to know that it's okay to swim through those. It's not fun to swim through them, but it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, thumbs up for that.
Great, great.
Oh, there, Jen's saying yay. Gary has the question, the HABs, HABs are hazardous to what species? Are they a plant or bacteria?
So hazardous algal blooms have been studied around the world. In the ocean, it tends to be the red algae that are dinoflagellates. In fresh water, and those are very dangerous in the ocean. Shellfish industries are closed down. They produce lots of toxins, but we don't have that in fresh water. We have dinoflagellates in fresh water, but they don't form blooms. There are two kinds of algae that do form blooms in fresh water. One are called the golden yellow algae. They produce odor problems, but they're not toxic. Then there are the blue-green algae. They're not actually an algae. They're actually a photosynthetic bacteria, but they're commonly called blue-green algae. And they can produce several toxins, and they are to be treated seriously. Cattle have died, dogs have died from drinking that water, and people have died. Now, the people that have died didn't die from drinking their water. It's actually tragic. It was in Brazil, and it was people that were on dialysis in a hospital. And the water from the hospital came from a lake that had a severe toxin-producing algal bloom. And the toxins are not removed by normal sand filtration or the treatment procedures that were used there. So the people on dialysis were being perfused with water that had these blue-green algal toxins in it, and a number of people died. So if you get these algal blooms, it must be treated seriously, and we need to understand why we're getting these blue-green algal blooms in lakes that we never thought would have them. And we're pretty sure that there's some link either to what's happening with the grazers or climate change affecting bottom water anoxia levels. I'll tell you, there's also implications for property values. I don't know how much, but that has actually been studied on what happens to real estate values when lakes have algal blooms. So for example, 3 Mile Lake in Muskoka, which routinely has algal blooms, cottages on that lake don't sell for what you might think they should sell for, given that they're a beautiful cottage on a northern lake, so.
Okay.
Did I capture the question there? Or?
I believe you did. I believe you did, Gary. I think that you've answered Gary's question there. I think that we're coming to the end of our time, Norman, and there's quite a few more questions there. So we're going to just do one more question, and those that don't get their answers to the questions, we will hopefully be able to, if it's okay, Norman, that we can send the questions to you later on and sort of get your feedback on those answers to some of those questions. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay, so one last question we have for this evening is, when the fallen leaves are blown into the lake in the fall, would that change the oxygen supply to the fish in the lake over the winter?
Well, that's been happening forever, and so probably not. What it could do, though, is provide a pulse of relatively available nutrients from those leaves at a time when climate change is leaving the lake warm enough that an algal bloom could happen. Like, I've only presented one hypothesis for why we might be getting these algal blooms in lakes that never used to have them. Another one is related to the introduction of leaf fall at a time when the lake's still warm enough that the leaves degrade quite quickly and phosphorus is released and you can get a bloom. Winter,
Winter leaves.
yeah, winter leaves. So oxygen levels in shallow lakes can certainly fall to very low levels under the ice over the course of the winter. Lakes like Kashagawigamog are deep enough that I don't think it's an issue at all.
Okay, good enough. So there we go. That I think concludes this evening's talk. I just wanted to send it over to Bob Carter right now to say a little thank you.
Well, Norman, thank you very much. I know elephant snot will appear in my dreams tonight, but thank you and for explaining this situation. As we all know, it's a multi-dimensional issue, and everything that's associated with the health of our lakes. Some we can control, and little steps that we take will help improve things. So I have an envelope here thanking you, and I'm passing it to you virtually.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for being part of these seminars, and we look forward to hopefully getting updates from you in upcoming seminars when we put them on.
And my pleasure. And I'll tell you, because Ash Halliburton got mentioned, that what I'm working on these days is an Ash Canada grant application that will include Halliburton. And we're hoping that we can do some tests at Abbey Gardens, for example, on using ash for brownfield restoration.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great news, everybody. Yay, yay for Ash Muskoka to include Ash Halliburton. That's wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Norman, for being here. We hope that you've enjoyed our 3 little seminars that we've had. Look to YouTube if you want to get refreshed. This one will be uploaded as soon as it gets edited by Scott and his son, Alex. But thank you so much for being there. Without you all being here, this wouldn't be possible. So we appreciate you being a part of these seminar series, and hopefully we can do it again in person next time soon. Don't forget about our AGM, Cash Art on the Water in August, and look for those videos from the youth of today that are going to hopefully be leaders to protect our lakes forever, like Norman is trying to do. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining tonight. Stay healthy, stay safe, and have a wonderful evening. Bye for now. Thanks so much.